Welcome to the Civil War Digital Digest. For today's episode, we're going to talk about the ration that the Union soldier received. The ration is spelled out in the United States Army regulations. However, if you talk to the drummer from the 2nd Minnesota, or if you talk to John Billings, who was a veteran who wrote the book Hardtack and Coffee, not everything showed up all the time and not everything showed up on time. But this is the perfect world. We're going to run a small sub-sequence within the military subjects part of Civil War Digest called the ration and what to do with it. Now, if we're going to figure out what to do with it, we should know what it is first. Everything laid out here did not get to a man, even in the perfect world, but we've got several options. Options for meat, options for flour, even options for coffee. Let's go through them. The meat ration. This is not a man's meat ration. This is 3 men's meat ration, and it's 3 options. Salt pork is probably the most common. If you received any form of pork, whether salt or whether a cured meat like this cured bacon, the men received 12 ounces per day. The Army also sometimes drove herds of cattle with them and slaughtered fresh. They also could receive salt beef. Any sort of a beef ration would be 1 pound, 4 ounces per day. Along with meat, the men received flour. If you look at Billings's book, the book is entitled Hardtack and Coffee. Hardtack is the most common bread ration for the men. When hardtack was issued, it was supposed to be 1 pound or about 10 pieces per day. At places where the Army could construct ovens and give the men fresh bread, they would do that. And whether the men were issued flour to deal with themselves or issued soft bread cooked, the ration was to be 1 pound, 6 ounces. On the occasion the men got cornmeal instead of flour, they received 1 pound, 4 ounces. You note the cornmeal that we have today is not the finely ground items that you can get like from Quaker at the store. This is a vendor who does a coarse ground and leaves the germ in, so it's more whole corn ground and then put in the bag. We feel it's a better representation for you. Billings's book, Hardtack and Coffee. There's 2 ways you can get your coffee. You can get the coffee roast, or it could be issued to you green. These are the 2 most common ways. A roast coffee is going to be 1.25 ounces per man per day. Green, because it's wet, is going to be 1.5 ounces per day. The men would have to roast the coffee themselves before they made their coffee. Usually coffee comes with sugar, and Billings even wrote that the men like to have their little poke sacks and would often combine these 2 rations in their haversack. The sugar ration equates, though it's given out to 100 men, when you break it up, equates to about 2.25 ounces per man. We've got this broken out like this so you can see it. It's also broken out this way because Billings tells the story of how his company often issued rations. And that was, say a bag of coffee showed up. The orderly or first sergeant would lay a gum blanket out and would divide the ration that they received into the number of men who needed to receive rations. Then, to make sure nobody was playing favorites, he stood up and turned his back to the gum blanket, and another soldier would stand by the gum blanket, would point at a pile and say, "What man shall get these?" The orderly sergeant, looking away and looking at his roll book, would say a man's name. The man would come up, take his ration, and go back to his tent. So, the most common on the march was the pork ration, the flour ration, and coffee and sugar. The others often showed up more in camp, and the Army said that the men should get either beans or peas and get about 2.25 ounces of each per day per man. And at the same time, they should get rice or hominy and get about 1.25 ounces each there. Salt was issued to the men at about 1/2 ounce per man per day. And then the men would split up per 100 men 4 quarts of vinegar, and they would get 1.25 pounds of either adamantine or stearin candles. Now, this is not a man's issue. About 7 of these equals an issue per 100 men per day. So there's not a lot of that around. Finally, soap. It was supposed to be issued, and it ends up being about 1/2 ounce a man per day. So as you look across, you see the ration of a Union soldier or the different options therein. In the future, we're going to look at what we can do with it in later episodes. If you like what you've seen, we'd love to have you hit like on this episode and subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you another time on the Civil War Digital Digest.